speakers. I have with us Bill Brookreson and Gail Sklar. Bill is the author of this presentation, and you folks are seeing it for the first time around. Bill Brookreson retired after a 32-year career with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, where, among other roles, he served as Assistant Director for Plant Services, Assistant Director for Pesticide Management, Assistant Director for Agency Operations, and retired after 7 years as Deputy Director. Bill holds an Associate of Arts degree from Lower Columbia College, a BA from Western Washington University, and a master's degree from the University of Illinois, where he studied Russian and East European history. Bill is an active member of the Washington Native Plant Society. With his retirement in 2006, Bill became a native plant steward. In that role, he has put in over 11,000 volunteer hours, heavily involved in a number of restoration projects in Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia. Bill has given a number of talks on native plants to groups in all 3 cities. Bill became chair of the South Sound chapter of WNPS from 2014 through 2018 and serves on the State Executive Board and Stewardship Committee, as well as editing the chapter newsletter. Bill has been on the board of Pacific Northwest Invasive Plant Council since 2008. Bill's married to Catherine Hovanek, the retired director of the Washington Native Plant Society. Bill and Catherine, between them, have 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Everybody say hello to Bill. Thank you, Bill, for your work on this presentation today. And today our presentation is going to be presented by Gail Sklar. And Gail is a relatively new Washingtonian, as she moved in 2015 from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, after retiring after 44 years as an educator to be closer to her beautiful family. In 2016, Gail enrolled in our Tacoma Native Plant Steward class, and in 2016 took her training and became a natural area steward for China Lake Park in Tacoma. Gail also became very active in the South Sound chapter. In 2018, Gail was recruited not only as chair of the Native Plant Appreciation efforts for the South Sound chapter, but also for the Washington Native Plant Society at the state level, where Gail ran the Native Plant Appreciation Week committee and then suggested to the board of directors that we create flexibility for this event and change it to the Native Plant Appreciation Month, being the month of April annually. On the South Sound board, she's also served as the South Sound chapter speaker and vice chair of the Tacoma section of the chapter. Promoting native plants is not new to Gail. While living in the East, Gail worked to remove invasive plants and replace them with natives on her 2-acre property, while encouraging her neighbors to do the same. As a Penn State Master Gardener and now a WSU Master Gardener, she helps her neighbors identify invasive plants and replace them with natives. In her 3 years and 5 months as a native plant natural area steward, she leads work parties every month and bakes cookies for her volunteers at China Lake Park. More people visit the park now and thank her for her work and compliment the improved condition of the park. It is my pleasure to introduce these valuable volunteers to Washington Native Plant Society and our State Board of Directors. Thank you for being here tonight.
Everyone for attending this evening. This talk is entitled Common Native Woody Plants of the Puget Trough Ecoregion. And this was written and developed by Bill Brookreson and representing the Washington Native Plant Society South Sound chapter. In this presentation, you'll learn about some of the most common Northwest native plants found in our Puget Trough, Washington environment. I will not be covering the many herbaceous plants that are native to this area as well. And a native plant is, according to the Conservation Committee of WNPS, which stands for the Washington Native Plant Society, Washington native plants are plants that were present within the current borders of Washington state before European contact, generally regarded as circa 1800 in the Pacific Northwest. Native algae, fungi, and lichens are also primary species of interest to WNPS. Native plants are important because they have evolved to deal with our unique climate of very wet winters and very dry summers, and are generally shallow, poor soils. Native plants have developed a variety of strategies that allow them to exist without extensive watering, pesticides used for native pests, not exotics, or fertilizers. Our animal, bird, and fish species have evolved utilizing our native plants for everything from food to shelters and cover. They are part of a system, a chain of life. So where is the Puget Trough? Historically, the Puget Trough was part of one of the world's most productive ecological regions. The Puget Trough Ecoregion runs the length of Washington, rising to about 1,000 feet elevation between the Cascade Mountains on the east and the Olympic Mountains and Willapa Hills on the west. It is a very urbanized, densely populated region, which includes Vancouver, Centralia, Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, Everett, Mount Vernon, Bellingham, Puyallup, Kent, Renton, Bellevue, and Redmond, and equals 8% of the state's area. In addition, it is part of the larger Willamette Valley, Puget Trough, Georgia Basin ecoregion that extends south into Oregon and north into British Columbia. The climate determines the flora here. This area has a temperate maritime climate with mild, wet winters. The summers are warm and dry. This means January temperature is 39 degrees Fahrenheit and mean July temperature is 65 degrees Fahrenheit. The precipitation, mostly rain, averages 40 inches per year. The local average can vary greatly due to the prevailing moisture-laden winds from the southwest. In the rain shadow areas affected by the high Olympic Mountains, which include the northeast corner of the Olympic Peninsula, Whidbey Island, and the San Juan Islands. Average annual precipitation is 15 to 30 inches. In Seattle or Tacoma, near sea level, average annual precipitation is 35 to 50 inches. Where clouds slam into the Cascade Mountains and the foothills, average annual precipitation is 60 to 80 inches. Historically, coniferous forests dominated the vegetation, along with a mix of riparian habitats, oak woodlands and prairies maintained by Native Americans, mostly on glacier outwash. The vegetation in most of the ecoregion's landscapes have now been altered by development and agriculture. Today's goal. Today we will discuss a few of the key native trees and shrubs of the Puget Trough. There are many, many more to study and enjoy, and don't forget the hundreds of beautiful herbaceous plants that accompany them in nature. Key elements of our tree canopy in Western Washington. The three cornerstones are the Western red cedar, Douglas fir, and Western hemlock, and the native neighboring giant, the Sitka spruce. So the Western red cedar, Thuja plicata, is one of our most familiar trees in the Western Washington lowlands and a wide range of areas. The red cedar is not a true cedar, but an arborvitae. It tolerates a wide range of habitats from shade to partial sun. It tolerates wet habitats, but can also thrive in dry sites with good soil. It provides seeds and shelters for wildlife. It was one of the most valued trees for Native Americans, who made use of the wood and fibers for everything from canoes to baskets. Some tribes even use buds and other parts of the trees for medicinal purposes. Cedar characteristics. The bark is a useful identifier, being usually cinnamon red and stringy and fibrous. The leaves of Western red cedar are very distinct. It has the bow ties or butterflies on the undersides, and you can see those pictures on the right. It has both mature and immature cones, which range in size from 1/8 of an inch to 5/8 inches. It is one of the giants of our large tree maturity, 100 to 230 feet tall, and can live up to 1,000 years. The Douglas fir, Pseudotsuga menacei, is another of our lowland evergreens that many of you are familiar with. Like the Western red cedar, that is really not a cedar. The Douglas fir is not a fir. Named after the botanist explorer David Douglas, who introduced it to the world. It is a new introduction to the Pacific Northwest, only here about 7,000 years. Much more abundant now than when the Europeans arrived because of its use in reforestation. Historically, Western hemlock was a dominant tree. Unlike the hemlock, Douglas fir tolerates everything from full sun to partial shade, from fairly wet to dry soil conditioned. In logged areas, it was and is the ideal evergreen reforestation tree. Fairly rapid growing and hardy in reforestation efforts, it provides shelter, food, and cover for mammals. Native Americans used the wood for spear handles, harpoon shafts, spoons, dip net poles, harpoon barbs, fire tongs, salmon weirs, caskets, and halibut and cod hooks. The pitch was used to seal joints on implements such as harpoon heads, gaffs, and fish hooks, and for caulking canoes and water vessels. Wood is used in many types of construction. Pitch was used to make a medicinal salve for wounds and irritants. The bark of the young root is boiled by the Swinomish, and babies are washed in it. The bud tips are picked by them and chewed for sore throats and mouth sores. And here you can see the bark, the cones, and the end buds. The tree is distinctive in maturity for its deeply furrowed bark. The thick bark helps Douglas fir survive fires. Reddish-brown spindle-shaped buds are also a key identifier. The cones always give the tree away. The three forked bracts are protruding from the cone scales. And here is the Doug fir, which is another forest giant. It's a very large tree at maturity, over 250 feet tall, with 1,000+ year lifespan. The western hemlock, Tsuga heterophyllus, is the third pillar of evergreen canopies in western Washington. When the Europeans arrived, giant western hemlocks were the dominant species in western Washington forests. It is our state tree. It can be a challenge in restoration. Western hemlock seedlings need woody substrate such as nurse logs. In many cases, we have had poor survival of planting seedlings. In old growth Doug fir, because the tree shed a lot of bark that forms an ideal substrate for them. Large old Doug firs are often surrounded by minion hemlocks. Wood was widely used by Native Americans, especially for carving implements. Tannin in the bark was used as a tanning agent and in dyes. Boughs had a large number of uses, such as bedding. Critical part of old growth habitats for things such as spotted owl, cover, and nesting. Western hemlock characteristics. The first one is a nurse log is typical. Often find several species of trees in a row along a log. And you can see that in the upper left-hand corner. Tree is most easily recognized by its drooping leader and branch tips. The Latin heterophylla means leaves of variable size, which are 1/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. The density of the leaves gives the tree a lacy, fern-like appearance. The bark, thinner than Doug fir, is dark brown tinge with dark red divided into broad, flat ridges with scales. The old growth forests and hemlocks historically came in after the Douglas fir and thrived in the very shady environment, eventually replacing and squeezing out the Doug fir. They can be very large, over 250 feet high and long-lived. Our most shade-tolerant species, western hemlock, nearly always represents more than half of the foliage in old growth forests and controls the understory light environment. A mature hemlock tree casts a very dense shade, only allowing shade-tolerant plants to exist. And you can see it here, the ferns growing underneath. And now we come up to the Sitka spruce, Picea sitkensis. And it's most commonly found in our coastal lowlands, but also in the Puget Trough. It has a thin reddish bark with scale flakes. In large trees, the base is buttressed. Needles are very sharp and grow out of miniature pegs. And you can see that on the lower left-hand photo. Large paper-thin cones, and there it's on the above left. Sitka spruce is the largest Sitka spruce in the US, is found in the Quinault River. Trees grow to well over 200 feet. After giant sequoia and coastal redwood, they are the largest evergreen trees, and you can see how large it is by the 4 people standing in the roots. And there's Bill and Catherine, and I don't know who the others are. Some other conifers are the western yew, Taxus brevifolia, which is an understory tree, a slow grower, 20 to 50 feet tall. Fruit is rounded with the seed enclosed by a scarlet fleshy aurel. It's not edible, so don't eat it. It likes deep, rich, moist soil. Threatened by harvesting for taxol at one point. Next is the grand fir, Albes grandis, another very large tree, over 250 feet tall, found in the rain shadow areas of the coast, usually mixed with Doug fir. Flat needles, dark green with 2 lines of white stomata below. which you can see in the photos. A hardy plant, but more difficult to obtain for restoration. Widely used for Christmas trees because of the scent of the tree. Shore pine, Pinus contorta, variation latifolia, called lodgepole. Two-needled pine, 70 to 100 feet tall, tolerates a wide variety of environments, wet to dry. And then we have the ponderosa pine, Pinus ponderosa. The bark is thick and distinctively orange on mature trees, but gray on younger trees. It's sort of like us with our hair, darker when we're young, and it's the opposite, darker when we're young and gray when we're older. Fast growing to 180 feet tall, shade tolerant, drought tolerant. It likes open areas. It has dark furrows on mature bark, 6-inch needles in bundles of 3, and abundant large cones. And here you can see it better. There's a large cone, the furs, and the orange bark. And if you look closely at the needles, you can see they come in clumps of 3. Then we have our wonderful broadleaf trees, Oregon white oak, Gary oak, Quercus garryana. Our native oak, height to 70 feet, prefers warm, dry, open valleys and grasslands, sustained by Native American burnings. Leaves are leathery and soft with round lobes. The bark is gray with shallow fissures. An open environment has a broad crown. The acorns have a shallow cap. Next is the madrone, Arbutus menziesii. It's an evergreen broadleaf tree. Normally it is found growing on bluffs, angling for the light. It likes full sun, dry, poor rocky soils, which we have an abundance of here, but it is susceptible to a variety of pathogens. Here you can see on the left the madrone bark. It is known for its orange peeling bark. On the bottom right, lovely white flowers. The red berries are a favorite of the birds, and the wood is very dense and hard. Red alder, Ulmus ruba, is generally looked down upon by foresters, but is in fact the largest alder in the world and in the most plentiful hardwood in the Pacific Northwest. Red alder is a pioneering nitrogen fixing species. So if your soil is bad, you plant a few alder and it does help fix that. It's short-lived, only 100 years, and rapidly growing. It prepares the soil for conifer invasion. Red alder refers to the inner bark. It's the most likely species you will find in a newly cleared area. Its male catkins are distinctive in winter, like our native hazelnut. The fruit of the alder is a woody cone-like conifer cone, and you can see it in the bottom left corner. Big leaf maple, Acer macrofolius. It's the most massive maple in the world. In our woods, it is often festooned with licorice ferns, which you can see in the bottom corner there, bottom right, mosses and lichens. All maples bear their leaves, twigs, buds, and wing fruits in pairs opposite each other. They are just so beautiful. So you can see the flowers and the leaves in pairs, and on the right hand, you can see the leaves, the seeds with the little furry, fuzzy top where it connects to the leaf. It's 65 to 100 feet tall. The lifespan is about 300 years, likes open forest. We see it most often with alder and regrowth areas. It's a desirable hardwood for furniture and other items, seeds, thickets, and shelters for wildlife. When the leaves are half grown, it has fragrant yellow flowers 4 to 6 inches long. The flowers become samara fruit. Next, we have the vine maple, Acer circinatum. The vine maple is a smaller understory tree or shrub and has lovely little paired red seeds. I want to go back and describe it better. It's 13 to 26 feet high. The leaves have lobes that are 7 and 9 lobes each. The Douglas maple is also a less common tree shrub and has 5 lobes only. It likes partial sun to shade and likes well-drained soil. Useful understory restoration plant. Provides food and shelter for wildlife. Native Americans use the very hard wood for snowshoes, fish nets, etc. It's good for holding slopes. So if you have a slope you're afraid about erosion for, it's an amazing place to plant that, and it has wonderful fall color. Next is the black cottonwood, Populus trifoliatus. It's the tallest, deciduous, and the fastest growing tree in the Pacific Northwest, in the Puget Trough area. One in the Olympia National Forest tops out at 188 feet. It prefers the wet bottomlands, can be live staked. Dark green, somewhat leathery leaf, is triangular in shape. It has the silvery underside, which gives it a toned appearance in the wind. Black cottonwood flowers, buds, and fruit. Sticky, shiny bulbs give off a balsamic odor. As its name suggests, cottonwoods release cottony tufts with millions of seed in each spring. And where you have a dense population of them, it can look like it's snowing. Oregon ash, Fraxinus latifolium, is found in lowland areas of Washington, south of Tacoma. Height is 80 feet, grows in wet habitats such as bottomlands and swamps, prefers open areas, not too much shade, lives up to 200 years, but it is threatened by the emerald ash borer. The leaves are pinnately compound, leaf with multiple leaflets, 2 to 4 opposite pairs with leaflet at the end. The rough bark has crisscross furs. Dioecious male and female trees. Female bear fruit of multiple carb samaras. The seeds are important food for wildlife. And here is a picture of our Pacific dogwood, Cornus nutalii, one of our most beautiful flowering trees. It's the tallest dogwood in the world, can reach over 60 feet high. Distinctive leaves, veins follow the curve of the leaf and stretch into threads when the leaf is pulled apart. Berries provide food for the birds. It's very susceptible to anthracnose. What attracts people is not the flower, which is the very center little green area, but the white bracts that surround the small, true green flower. Fall color and occasional flowers. And then we're going to go on to tree shrubs and understory plants. Red osier dogwood, Cornus cerevisia, grows up to 15 feet tall on stream banks and in wetlands. It will grow in drier areas as well, notably forest edges. Excellent for wetland restoration. It is easy to start from live stakings or cuttings. Berries can provide food. Thickets provide shelter for birds and animals and is known for its striking fall color. For dogwoods, a good identifier is to pull the leaves apart and note the strong fibers. It lacks the bracts of the Pacific dogwood. The bright, newer stems give the plant its common name, and you can see them on the right-hand side, the photo on the right-hand side. Next is the beaked hazelnut, Corias cornuta, and it's a shrub-like tree, 3 to 13 feet tall. Like the alder, it's noticeable for its winter catkins. Partial sun to shady areas. It likes a moist environment, but will tolerate drier ones. The leaves feel fuzzy to the touch. Distinctive catkins, much like red alder. The nuts are a favorite of the birds or small mammals, so don't count on collecting the nuts because you have to be up there before the birds are. Lewis and Clark traded for those nuts as food for winter at Fort Clatsop. And the leaves, you can see the ridges on the leaves along the edges, very distinctive. Next is the snowberry, Symphoricus albus. It's a good thicket-producing shrub with small opposite leaves. Opposite leaves are a good help in identifying because they are rare. And you can see that in the bottom left-hand corner. Snowberry, leaves, berries, and flowers. And you can see the opposite leaves here very clearly. The berries are considered toxic to people. They provide food for birds, but not their first choice. It's their food of last resort. Flowers in pairs and the fruits appear about the same time. And their outside is pink and the berries are also red on the outside and then turn white as soon as they start opening. The Indian plum, Mammillaria cerasiformis, usually going unnoticed. It is the first flowering shrub of the spring with its green and white flowers. It's very pretty little flowers and appears early in March. Can grow to 16 feet high. It likes partial sun or shade, wet to dry habitat. So what I consider to be partial sun or shade is morning light. That works well for me in my gardening. Oops, let me go back. I'm sorry. Indian plum berries are food for birds and mammals. Dioecious Indian plum has both male and female plants. The plums are borne only on the female. Next is salmonberry, which is Rubus spectabilis. It's another thicket producing shrub that is often found growing along with red twig dogwood on stream banks and other wet locations. The golden brown stems are sparsely thorny. It grows up to 13 feet, easy to propagate from cuttings or transplant, very versatile from full sun to mostly shady. It likes wet to dry areas. Berries are food for birds and mammals. Native Americans use the berries for food and wood for tools and arrows, and they are tasty. At one of our South Sound chapter meetings, one of the members brought in preserves made from various berries, including salmonberry. It's wonderful. It's salmonberry is the only raspberry with a red flower. Trifoliate compound leaves, as you can see, and that means 3 leaves, and they're all compound. Berries range from red to purple to yellow. Thimbleberry, Rubus parafolius, is a widespread member of the Rubus genus, or raspberry. Forms dense thickets of plants spread by rhizomes. It's thornless. Thimbleberry leaves, flowers, and fruits raspberry-like clusters of red, juicy berries, widely used by Native Americans, often mixed with other berries. That was one of the berries in that preserves I just talked about. Small white flowers, large lobed leaves, give it away. Next is our red flowering currant, Ribes sanguineum. It's one of my favorites. Lovely, lovely flowers, which the hummingbirds adore. It grows to 3 to 10 feet, easy to propagate, like sun in open forests. Red flowering currants attract butterflies, hummingbirds. The berries provide food for the birds and small mammals. And when the flowers open, I could go out and see the hummingbirds just enjoying the nectar. Seed from this plant were so esteemed in Europe that they paid David Douglas's entire 2-year expedition to the Pacific Northwest. The 3-lobed leaves and fruits are blue, black. Pacific 9-bark, Isocarpus capiteus, is a delightful plant for wet area restoration. It's usually found in wet, somewhat open areas along the edge of moist woods or meadows. Very easy to propagate from cuttings. Can grow to 12 feet under the right conditions. The bark is dark and thin layered, named because the peeling bark was thought to have 9 layers. Excellent food and cover for birds and butterflies. And here you can see the flowers becoming fruit and the leaves. Colorful clusters of flowers and 3-lobed leaves again. Moving on to serviceberry, Saskatoon, Amelicera alnifloria. Is another useful shrub for science and partial shade areas with moist or well-drained soil. This can get up to 15 feet tall. And so many people in our neighboring Canada and our area take the berries and make Saskatoon pies, much like our blueberry pies. They like open forest and forest edges. The nectar is used by hummingbirds and butterflies. Fruits are eaten by birds and mammals, and they're very edible for people, as I just mentioned, and yummy. We have a huge serviceberry or Saskatoon in China Lake Park. Has white flowers in spring. The leaves are broadly oval, and pea-sized black fruits appear in late summer. So as the blueberries end, the Saskatoons appear. Red elderberry, or Sambucus racemosa, is a tall shrub or small tree, and is one of the few deciduous shrubs with compound leaves. It can grow up to 20 feet. It likes full sun to partly sunny with moist soil. It's useful in wetlands and stream banks, open forest and edges. Nectar is used by bumblebees and hummingbirds. Native Americans used the hollow stems for whistles and toys. It's easily identified by the brilliant red berries. Fruits are eaten by birds and small mammals. Native Americans use the cooked berries for use. However, the raw berries may cause nausea. Leaves are opposite with 5 to 7 leaflets. Flowers are white in clusters and good for jams and wine. Here we have the ocean spray. Polydiscus, this color, is another useful shrub for restoration, commonly found in open, dry woods, and they are beautiful. Grow up to 13 feet tall. Leaves look like arrowheads or small Christmas trees. So here we can see the clusters of white flowers that make the plant easy to identify and bloom and give it its common name. The spent flowers tend to persist through winter and provide food for birds. Spirea or hardtack, Spirea douglasii, is another thicket-producing plant, typically found in sunny, open, wet to moist areas such as swamps and marshes. Can produce impenetrable, my goodness, thickets up to 7 feet tall. Spirea or hardtack flower seeds and leaves, each stem can display a plum of pink flowers, or I should say a plume of pink flowers. Leaves are alternate and oval, typically with teeth on the edges. Like ocean spray, spent leaves persist through the winter and provide food. Mock orange or Philadelphus louisii is found in sunny areas, open areas on both sides of the Cascades. This deciduous shrub fades into the background when not in flower. Excellent in sunny open areas and edges, grow up to 10 feet tall. Nectar is used by butterflies, seeds by birds, a favored horticultural plant. Native Americans use the wood for arrows and other implements. The flowers are small but so fragrant. It almost smells like orange blossoms. It is the star of this plant. And here you can see the little fruits coming out and also the lovely leaves. Salal, Altharia shallon, is evergreen and is a dominant companion plant of undisturbed evergreen forests. It's an undergrowth shrub and can grow tall and very thick. It can grow up to 6 feet or taller in the shade, can grow in anything from full sun to deep shade, wet to dry soils. Leaves are dark green, leathery, and zigzag on the stem. Can be frustrating in restoration work since it can be a slow starter, but it is valued in horticultural trade. Here are the beautiful little flowers, and you can see the berries. The berries are eaten by birds and mammals. Native Americans use the berries as food and as a thickener for dyes. Typical urn-shaped flower of the heather family. Fruits are purple when ripe. So you can see the bottom of the leaf, the little urn-like shape. The flower on the left-hand side. I went to point to it and I forgot that nobody can see me right now. Evergreen huckleberry, Vaccinium ovation, is our most common evergreen huckleberry. It can get up to 13 feet, but typically shorter. Usually found within 5 miles of salt water. Grows best in shade or partial shade. Moist, well-drained to dry soil. Relatively easy to grow. And here are the fruits and flowers of the evergreen huckleberry. It also has urn-shaped flowers of the heather family. Berries are the real prize. Very tasty if you're quick enough to get them before the birds. Stay on the plant until frost if you can get them. They were a staple of Native American diet, eaten by birds and mammals, and also bears. Red huckleberry, Vaccinium parvifolium, is deciduous, unlike the evergreen. It tolerates partial sun to mostly shady and wet areas. The shrub is deciduous and can get up to 12 feet tall. Urn-shaped flowers, like the of the heather family. The red huckleberry loves decaying wood. It has sparse flowers and berries. It needs a rich organic soil and is often found growing on stumps and logs. Fruit is bright red, not too much of it, and is edible. It's slightly tart though, used by birds and mammals and people. Branches are bright green and angular. Tall Oregon grape, Berberis aquifolium, or Mahonia aquifolium, is an excellent plant in restoration use. It's a good evergreen shrub, grows mostly on sunny to partly sunny areas, can grow up to 6.5 feet tall, grows in wet to dry soils with poor nutrients. So if you have soil that isn't too good, this is your plant. It has compound holly-like leaves, like leaflets, 5 to 9 leaflets, and they have like a little sticky thing like holly. Bright yellow flowers in early spring. Clusters of purple berries resemble clusters of grapes. They're eaten by birds, small mammals, and people, used by Native Americans as food. They spread by rhizomes. Low or dull Oregon grape, Burbis nervosa, or Mahonia nervosa, really exceeds 3 feet, needs at least partial shades of full shade, handles moist to dry soils, usually found in forest understory. Here is the low Oregon grape fruit, its leaves and flowers. Again, yellow flowers. The flowers and fruits look like tall Oregon grape flowers and fruits. They're edible by people, berries used by birds and small mammals, distinguished by having more leaflets than the tall Oregon grape, 9 to 19 versus 5 to 9. The Nuka rose, Rosa nucana, can and does produce impressive thickets up to 8 feet tall. It is a vigorous spreader, likes mostly sunny, wet to dry areas, usually found on forest edges or openings or shores. Rose hips are food for birds and mammals. Provides good shelter for birds and small mammals because the leaf structure is so thick, as you can see. So here you can see the Nuka rose, the flower, fruits and leaves. Note particularly the thorns. Not fun to get stuck in your finger. It has a 2 to 3 inch fragrant rose flower. The rose hips are reddish or purplish red and persist. The plant has 2 prominent thorns beneath each note. The ball-tip rose, Roses gymnocarpa, often confused with the Nuka rose. But as you can see here, look at the thorns on this, compared to the thorns on the Nuka rose. Very different. It's orange top, scarlet pear-shaped hips, numerous small thorns, named because of the crown of sepals falls away early from the fruit, leaving the bald hip. Next is Pacific rhododendron microphyllum, close with our state flower, usually found near the coast. So we're going to thank the following folks for the use of their images: WNPS and the Starflower Foundation Images, Bill, Rod, and Catherine. Thank you so much. These are online sources and these are all books. For more information, and here are 3 books that I have with me when I'm looking to identify things frequently. When I'm working in the China Lake, I always have my Poe jar and McKenna with me. The Flora of the Pacific Northwest, the 3rd edition, is wonderful. And as are The Trees and Shrubs of the Pacific Northwest by Mark Turner and Ellen Coleman. Online sources: Washington Native Plant Society, and if you go to WNPS.org, you can find the Starflower link, a link to the Burke-Humbarium image collection, and 2 useful download programs for your phone: Washington Wildflowers and Trees of the Pacific Northwest. Questions? Turn it over to Bill now.
Well, Ernie Thompson made a beautiful comment where he said, when you mentioned the mock orange, he said this is #1 for lovely smell, and he planted right in front of the door since it has a sweet fragrance, and he mixed it with native rose for a combination of smells beyond compare. It's just beautiful.
I never could figure out why people would plant a mark orange any place where you couldn't smell it, because it is so wonderful.
And Ernie also mentions the beautiful smell of Indian plum in the early spring. So other questions that we have. This is from Kayla Kawapi. Why is the red cedar not a true cedar? What makes a true cedar, and where are they?
My wife probably could answer that better because she's the botanist in the family, but the red cedar is an arborvitae rather than a true cedar. There are, trying to think if there are any real true cedars in Washington, that I can think of right off the top of my head. It all depends on how you characterize some of these things. They've changed over time. It's like the Douglas fir, which is actually a pinaceae, but it's what botanists thought it was has changed several times.
Kayla, I see that you have your hand raised. Would you like to add to your question?
Oh, that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Anita Lemonis, what is the diff between kinnikinick and cotton Easter?
A cotoneaster?
Cotoneaster, very good. Can I transplant them easily?
Kinnick is an Archistophilus, a very good plant because it's sun tolerant. Cotoneaster is not a native. They are all the Archistophilus can be transplanted, but it's not the easiest thing. You need to do it at the right time of the year when it's moist. Kinnick is fairly easy to come by, so it's probably easier than transplanting it just to purchase additional plants. There is a cross between kinnick and hairy manzanita that is a very nice plant. It's a Archistophilus media, which has some of the same characteristics of Kinnikinnick, except it's a little bushier, just slightly much. They all both have beautiful flowers on them. So I use that. It was a natural cross that was found by Mount Hood a few years ago, and it's been sold a little bit in the nursery trade as Arctostophilus or Arctostophilus media. But Cotoneaster I have not tried to transplant. I've had to pull some of it out in restoration projects, but I have not tried to transplant it, so I can't speak to that.
So Anita's also got a raised hand.
Yes.
Anita, would you like to unmute yourself to ask your second question?
Hi there, how are you? Thank you so much. That was so helpful. I've wondered about the Cotoneaster and the Kinnikinnick for a while. Also, I just wonder, is it possible to grow ferns in a sunny spot if we keep them watered, or is that just contrary to their nature?
Ferns, the western sword fern you can grow in a moderately sunny spot if the soil's good and you have some good soil moisture. Most of the ferns are shade plants, and I love ferns. I have probably 10 different ferns I grow in the yard here. But the only one I've had much success with in any moderately sunny area has been the western sword fern, because it's such a hardy plant. It's very hard to kill the thing. And it's very easy to, if you have a large western sword fern, to divide it and use some of your divides to spread your sword fern. I wouldn't plant it in too sunny an area. If you keep it watered, it should do all right, but it likes the edge more than it does the sun.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
What are the?
And the next question is from Barbara Long Redhorse. What are the best sources to purchase these plants?
Well, if you go to the WNPS website, you'll see a list of the sources for native plants. In our particular area, I buy a lot of them from one of our vendors over in Gig Harbor. Again, it's going to depend on the plants you want. I haven't found any one source that has all the plants I wanted particularly. But I would go to that source on the website and then give them a call and see that you make sure they have the plants. Are you looking for anything special?
She doesn't mention, so I'm going to move forward to say, Barbara, if you go to WNPS.org and click on Gardening with Natives, where it says right next to the Nuka Rose on the home page, and then from that page, there's a right-hand toolbar, and you'll see sourcing native plants, and that is a list of nurseries that we update in the early spring every year with businesses around the state of Washington that sell native plants, seeds, and bulbs. And
but I haven't found a single place that had all the plants I wanted. Woodbrook over in Gig Harbor has got a really good selection, but even Woodbrook doesn't have some of the things I'm looking for. If you're looking for things like hairy manzanita, you got to look a lot to find it. So.
Again, we have a question. Could you put the list of books back up? Could you back up a little bit, please, in the presentation? And Kyle Putnam has a question. He says, hello, I'm particularly interested in how to learn which specific animal species in the Puget Trough might use each of these plants. Any suggestions on how to make these connections?
If you go to the WNPS website, you'll see a lot of good information about that. What specifically you're looking for in terms of, if the birds, for example, there's some really good material, and the Audubon Society has a very good website for the different birds in the area. If you put your zip code in there to this Audubon website, and they'll tell you not only the plants to plant, but the vendors where you can get them. Our website has got a lot of good material on there.
Also, we have a set of flip cards now.
Yeah.
Picture of the bird on one side and the plant that it feeds from on the other.
I would also recommend a book by Russell Link called Living with Wildlife in the Pacific Northwest. Excellent, excellent resource for that.
Very good. And Mike Antrim asks, was Oak Harbor named after the Gary Oak? Was it on E Common on Whidbey? I'm not quite sure I understand that, but was Gary Oak Common on Whidbey Island, I think is the question.
Yeah, actually, Gary Oak is fairly common out on the islands where it's sunny and drier. It's common up in British Columbia in the same way, and it's common in the areas where the Native Americans kept the area open. What threatens Gary Oak more than anything else is the encroachment of Douglas fir into some of the what had been historically prairie areas, where it shades out the Douglas the Gary Oak. But the Gary Oak is our only native oak. Though I've heard at least some people think there are some other oaks right along the Columbia River, but I've never seen any of them. So as far as I know, it's generally thought of as our only native oak. So Oak Harbor, I'm sure, was named after the Gary Oaks in the area.
And Renee Frederickson, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question? You may unmute yourself.
Well, just a comment, if I might, about back to the question about Western red cedar and true cedars. Western red cedar is actually a cypress and belongs to Cupressaceae family, just like Alaska yellow cedar and Port Orford cedar and any number of them. The true cedars are in the genus Cedrus, and they're Mediterranean, and they grow. They're the cedars of Lebanon family. So none of them grow native here, but one of them, the deodar cedar, is planted all over the city.
That's for sure.
And in the freeway medians, you see a lot of deodar cedar, and that's Cedrus deodari. So those are the true cedars.
Thank you, Renee. I'm going to mute you again. And Ray Red, you have a couple questions here, and I see your hand is raised. Would you like to ask them directly? You can unmute yourself.
Okay, well, one of them was, I just point out, I have never seen a mock orange in the wild. Where do they appear? Are they rare?
I have seen some of them more commonly over toward the eastern side of the state where it's more open and sunny. I have not seen a huge number of them in the wild.
Any idea where I could find one?
In the wild, or do you want?
Yeah, in the wild.
Well, I know from a study weekend a couple years ago, the Ingalls Creek Trail. You look that up, Ingalls Creek. It's beautiful.
In Oregon?
No, here in eastern Washington, just on the east, off of Highway 97. Beautiful, beautiful displays of mock orange in the forest.
Well, you go there when it was in flower, you wouldn't want to leave.
And Ray, you had a second question or statement about cedars?
Well, just that they are needled trees of the old world, and it's already been covered now.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. And then Cleo Rollerson, you had a question. Bill, which of these plants are you most concerned about dying back or significantly reducing their volumes?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question exactly. Could you repeat it, please?
Which of the plants are you most concerned about dying back or significantly reducing their volumes? So I think it's, do you see any of these plants as being endangered by habitat changes?
Probably the one that I've talked to a number of folks about over the time we are concerned about a lot is the western hemlock. The change in as climate changes and it becomes drier, the western hemlock is a shade-loving plant that loves moisture and decaying wood material. And as that area shrinks, that's the one I talked to ecologists who are concerned about the future of the western hemlock. and that would be a huge loss for us since basically it's our straight tree.
Yes.
That one, and I just spent some time today. There is apparently a dieback that people are seeing for the big leaf maple, and they're not quite sure what it's caused by right now. They're seeing it a lot in the lower altitudes less than 1,000 feet. They're seeing dieback of big leaf maple, and they're not. And they doing the research on it this afternoon. Nobody was quite sure why they're seeing it, which would be a huge loss for us since it's the world's largest maple, and it's a wonderful plant with beautiful flowers, and it's a key part of a lot of our environment. So those two, the hemlock because of the change in the climate, and the big leaf maple because of this unknown whatever it is that's impacting them in the areas, especially in Southwest Washington right now.
Thank you. And Karine Aliaga asks, what are some native shrubs I can plant in small spaces?
That's always an interesting question. That when I talk a lot about native plant gardening, that's one of the first questions that people ask. People love, for example, the Douglas fir, but when it grows to 250 feet tall, not a good plant for small spaces. It depends again on your small space. If you want a small evergreen tree, for example, the mountain hemlock is a wonderful choice. I have one that's probably 15 years old now, and it's about 4 feet tall. And when I planted it, it was about 2 feet tall, so it's a slow grower. In a small space, it depends on what your goal is. There are a lot of them, and I do a lot of them in pots because, well, I married a botanist and she loves plants, and we've run out of space, so we now plant them in pots because we got no place else to plant them. But there are a lot of them that do well in small spaces and in pots. If you want to contact me directly and tell me a little bit about more the area you're planting, I'd be happy to kind of walk through it with you.
Very good. We have an anonymous attendee referring to perhaps some of the tree issues you were just talking about, Bill, with the Douglas fir tree is reported to be impacted by a root fungus that set it up for dying and being knocked down.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that more associated with the hemlock problem?
The root rot on the Douglas fir has been around for quite some time, and in the areas where it impacts it, it's been a very heavy impact on some of the Douglas firs. It's not as widespread, for example, and if you're looking at the long term, the hemlock issue is probably more long term. The Douglas fir, the pileated root rot on the Douglas fir is a very serious problem in some areas. Almost everything has something, Pacific madrone is a beautiful tree, but I think there's 26 different funguses that attack it. So they all have something that I don't know. There are too many of them. They don't have some kind of a problem.
Do the licorice ferns damage the big leaf maple trees?
Absolutely not. They grow in the moss and things on the outside of the tree. It's a wonderful fern. And you'll find I grow a lot of licorice fern as a ground cover.
Yeah.
Because it grows beautifully on the ground as well as on the tree. It does not damage the tree at all. And it's not saprophytic or anything of that nature, but it's just it just loves the moisture and the acidic nature of that moss on the tree. So it's the wonderful way to identify big leaf maple when you walk in the woods, because it'll be this time of the year, it'll be covered with that beautiful licorice fern.
Bonnie Way has a second big leaf maple question. How far apart do you need to plant them?
It gets huge. You want to get it is the world's largest maple tree. So if you're going to plant big leaf maple, unless you have an awful lot of area, you may not want to plant more than one, because it does grow fast. It's about a 300-year life cycle, but it is a huge tree. Now, if you want to have a number of maples, the Acer cistinatum, the vine maple, is a much more compact tree, and you can plant those in a much smaller area. But the big leaf maple, be very careful that you're not planting a tree that you're going to have to cut down because it's so large and you have no space for it.
And Cleo Rollison is interested in some discussion about which plants mentioned are best adapted to our gardens and which should we enjoy out in the wild. Also, what is more prevalent in the Seattle metro area versus the eastern edges of the Pacific Trough or in the southern parts? For example, ash is almost never seen up here, but can be found in the south.
Yeah, the edge of the range of the Fraxinus latifolia is about here in Pierce County. There's some wonderful Oregon ash about and this is sort of the edge of its environment here in Pierce County. Most of the stuff that was on the discussion today is pretty much throughout the area. Some of the exceptions would be things like the ponderosa pine, which you'll only find. The biggest bunch of ponderosa pine is on what is now Fort Lewis, or Joint Base Lewis McChord, and in the open prairie areas, the Oregon white oak is only going to be found in open, drier areas. You won't find a lot of Oregon white oak, for example, in the Seattle area. It's too wet. But you will find it out on the islands. So it's climate more than latitude that determines that. Most of the others on that list will grow pretty much throughout the whole of the Puget Trough. I can't think of any others that, as long as you plant them in the right environment, and most of them will work in a garden. But again, the key is understand what your garden is and what kind of environment you have to work with. If it's a shady environment, there's some of these plants that do really well in the shade, but they won't survive in the sun, or they won't thrive in the sun. There's some that require the sun, but they don't thrive in the shade. So know your plant and know your own garden, and that'll give you the best choice of plants. But most of these that were listed on today will grow in through in the gardens quite well.
Very good. So I'm going to combine two questions that are in the chat.
Okay.
Mike, and I'm sorry, Mike, I can't see your whole last name here. So he needs a fast-growing plant for a shady area to hide a structure. For a wooded fir cedar area, what do you suggest, but not a tree? And then Bruce West is asking, how long does it take a 3-foot tall vine maple to grow up to 8 feet?
And my vine maples grown up to 8 feet in about 3 or 4 years. And again, where you plant them in the wild, they don't grow quite that fast, because in a garden environment, you usually have a little richer soil and you have more consistent water, so they'll grow fairly quickly. Now, Denise, can you repeat the first question again, please, for me?
Well, the first question is a fast-growing plant for a shady area to hide a structure. For a wooded fir and seeded area, but not a tree. So I combine these because a vine maple would be one option.
Vine maple is an option. Let me think about that one for just a minute.
Okay.
A lot of these will get. How tall do you want it? What are we looking to hide it? How
say?
Is it? Because things like Pacific 9 bark will grow quite nicely and grow fairly quickly, and provide you food and shelter and attractants for pollinators. Mine probably is now 12 or 14 feet tall. It depends on how tall you want it, and the 9 bark you can prune back fairly nicely. That would be one that I would say will work in the shade, and in again, it depends on how dry the area is or how wet the area is. But I would use something like 9-bark, the Corlus cornuta. Will grow fairly large, but it's kind of a gangly thing. It may not be the thing you want. If you're looking for something evergreen, you would have to start with something fairly large to get you kind of the cover you want. Tall Oregon grape grows fairly quickly, and you need to keep it pruned back. That it'll take a shade and sun, but it prefers the sunnier environment. Again, I'd have to know how shady is to give you the best of all answers. I think my email is there. If you mail me a picture of the area, I may give you a better idea. I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Brenda Cunningham is confirming that yes, Oak Harbor was named after Gary Oak. It's still a very common tree there, and Smith Park is entirely oak. Thank you, Brenda. And Robert Pellet is asking, where can we find Sea of Lebanon? We believe we have one that is 100 years old on Whidbey. Can they cross with the Atlas cedar? Do we know?
I wouldn't have the vaguest idea. The cedars of Lebanon, I'm not sure exactly what the genus and species are for that particular plant. Somebody who's a more accomplished botanist than I may be able to answer that. And I don't know that I don't know what the success of crossing any of those are. That's beyond my expertise.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And let's see, Donna Harju has great success growing vine maples by stake planting, growing like weeds. She does a lot of bare root plants with them. Thank you, Dawn.
They are a wonderful plant for that. They are not hard to take a cutting off of, or just a part of a root and plant those, and you'll have another vine maple. It's a very vigorous plant, and it's a beautiful plant. If you've got, for example, a bank where you need to hold it, the way it roots and things like that it's a very good ground cover and a very good thing for holding soil. And it's just a beautiful tree, especially if you get a little sun on it, so you get the fall color.
So our expert Van Bobbitt, WNPS president, speaks regarding cedars and says there are no true cedars native to North America. True cedars are in the genus Cedrus, which is in the Pinaceae pine family. Western red cedar is in the Cupressaceae cypress family. True cedars that are commonly planted in in landscapes include the deodara cedar and the blue atlas cedar. Van, perhaps you and Robert Pellet could connect to answer his question further.
Yes, and I don't know what the cedars of Lebanon would have been, and whether how one would have been planted there, and though it's altogether possible somebody could have brought one in.
Judy Finn says, I have a 10-year-old evergreen huckleberry planted next to a walkway that needs to be pruned. Do you have any suggestions on how best to do this?
I prune the heck out of mine, and it doesn't seem to bother it particularly.
I would agree that the floral industry prunes many of our native evergreen huckleberries, and they still bloom, and they still fruit, and they grow like crazy. Does the moss slowly kill the big leaf maple tree?
The moss and the ferns, the licorice fern don't impact the tree at all. The tree is perfectly healthy and covered with moss and with licorice ferns.
Very good. And what trends do you see with native trees and shrubs in home landscaping?
I see, because a lot of the yards are limited in size, I see a movement for native trees that are smaller and more contained. That's why I think the mountain hemlock, for example, is getting used more and more because it stays small. Most of the trees, unless you've got a fairly good sized yard, you're not going to plant a Douglas fir or a western red cedar because they do get huge over time. The shore pine, the Pinus contorta variety contorta, gets used. The those are the trees I see moving for more compact sorts of thing. They have found a number of trees in nature that are weeping cedars, for example, or weeping trees that don't get so large. Those are now becoming rather more popular in some of the landscaping that I've seen. So
Very nice.
looking for things that are more compact, and as yards shrink, that can give you that feeling of nature without overwhelming your yard.
And Sherry and Jim Pedrick mentioned that we love our cascara, twinberry, and mock orange. And we have a very small yard.
Yeah, cascara is a wonderful tree, and that wasn't in the. It's a wonderful bird tree as well. So the cascara is one that if we hadn't made it, if we had the chance to add a few more to it, the cascara would be probably the first one we'd add to it because it is a wonderful tree for smaller yards, and it's a great bird tree.
Very good. Well, I think that just about wraps up our questions. I will share these questions with Bill and Gail, as well as your email addresses, so that they can answer your questions further as they think of things. Someone asked a question about recording. Yes, we are recording this presentation, and a link to it will be posted on our website, along with all the other wonderful webinars we've offered this month. By the end of this next week, we will be sending out our monthly e-news with links to these presentations, so you may watch them again or access them again to find things like that book list or other photos of the trees again. Thank you very much. Oh, we have one last question I want to ask, and it was about dogwoods, the Pacific dogwood. And B. Harrison asked, where can I see Pacific dogwood in the wild? And are they available to buy in nurseries? And what habitat do they prefer?
Yes, they're quite readily available. The Cornus natale is quite readily available, and it's fairly common in the wild. It is impacted by anthracnose, so it's can be a challenge in some yards, but it's fairly common in the wild. And it's beautiful, and this time of the year, it's just getting ready to bloom. So
I saw one blooming off of Highway 522 the other day. Beautiful.
Oh yeah. Well, it's one of those things that you don't notice it, and all of a sudden you say, my God, there it is. It's just beautiful.
Gorgeous.
It stands out all of a sudden, and then the bracts go away and the flowers go away, and then it disappears again. It's sort of like it becomes invisible.
Maxfield Shea is asking if WNPS hosts field trips or tours of some of the oak prairie habitats on JBLN.
We have been blessed to have a few tours we can get on there. Rod Gilbert, for example, has led some tours on there. The trick is getting onto the Joint Base Lewis McCord. You have to go through a rather elaborate process to do so.
So I think that just about wraps up our show. There's some wonderful comments. Good program. Thank you. Great job. Good info, Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail and Bill. And I'll be sure that they both receive all of your comments. Thank you all for participating.
Well,
our next webinar is Wednesday night, and it is about the native plant restoration planting done by the Forest Service along the new I-90 overpass and underpasses for wildlife byways. And Helen Lau will present the planning for those restoration activities and also show some of the great successes that they are seeing. And then on Thursday, we have a primer on Plant ID with Sarah Gage. Gail, Bill, thank you so much. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And
Have a good evening.
you too.